Hello, this is Clarence Moye with Awards Daily here with director Isabel Sandoval, who directed episode 6, Revelation of FX's Under the Banner of Heaven. Isabel, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi, Clarence. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Before we get started, I have to say I was doing a little bit of research and I stumbled across a video of you in the Criterion closet. And I believe what was shown in the video as your first selection was my favorite film of all time. And it's The Age of Innocence by Martin Scorsese. Gorgeous film. I was so happy, thrilled to see you pick that. We are unexpected, like kindred spirits here.
Yes.
And it's funny. I just started rereading the novel yesterday, and it's been decades since I read it. It's gorgeous novel, gorgeous novel. I love it so much. Anyway, I just had to say that. I had to gush for a second. So talking about Revelation, your episode again in FX's Under the Banner of Heaven, one of the things I think is most interesting and what sprung to mind was a picture that you had shared on Twitter a couple of weeks ago of you in your, what I'll call what you said was your cat suit, directing all the men in that episode of the basement where they're having their Mormon men powwow meeting. One thing I think is really interesting is, this is a perfect example of inclusivity, bringing different perspectives to a material. I assume that your personal lived experience is not close to that of the Mormon faith and Mormon extremism and all of that. So I'm interested to see what you brought from your personal life to this episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that I didn't know much really about Mormonism before coming on board Banner, but I did grow up Catholic in the Philippines, and the Philippines is 95% Roman Catholic. It's the most Catholic, most predominantly Catholic country in Asia by a wide margin. And, it's very conservative. And I was raised pretty devout. I was actually a server at Mass, at my school chapel in my grade school years. But then the older I grew and the more intimately and thoroughly I learned more about the history of the Catholic Church, I was growing more disillusioned about it all, and also realizing that I was queer. And that's why the crisis that Jeb Pyrie experiences in Under the Banner of Heaven is not as alien or as foreign to me as I would have thought. And that allowed me a way in to the narrative, actually.
Yeah, it's that definitely that examination of faith is definitely a universal expression of faith. When you look at that episode, you're directing episode 6, as I've said, three directors, I believe other directors have come in advance of that, working on, their own takes on this material. How do you both maintain a sense of continuity within the series while at the same time bringing your own personal touch to the material?
Certainly, like the pilot, as directed by David Mackenzie, sets the tone and the visual language of the show. So it's a propulsive true crime procedural on one hand. But what's great about my episode, and I'm so elated to have gotten the chance to direct episode 6, it's actually the most introspective and the most quiet, and I'd say even the most soulful of the entire series. And that's allowed me to infuse my distinct sensibility of, a feeling that's more delicate and lyrical and more intimate. And that it really focuses on, in this particular episode, the escalation of the erosion of faith within Jeb Pyrie, as played magnificently by Andrew Garfield. And so I think one of the most important visual decisions that I made for that episode is that although it juggles multiple characters and their important arcs and storylines, we have Ron Lafferty, played by Sam Worthington. We have Brenda, played by Daisy Edgar Jones. As I opened the episode with a tight shot of Jeb Pyrie, and I closed it also with a tight shot of Jeb Pyrie, so that we have a clear dramatic through line of who the episode is about. And I've always thought that Andrew's character was the emotional center of Banner, no question. And he's also the perfect vessel for it because he's so open and emotionally expressive, and that he is able to embody that feeling in the entire series.
The episode also features a dramatic confrontation between Alan Lafferty and his wife, Brenda, again played by Billy Howell and Daisy Edgar Jones.
Yes.
It's the first time where we really see a negative confrontation between the two of them. How did you work through that with them as actors?
We really talked through it for nearly an hour. And we also had a stunt coordinator just to make sure that nothing physically hurtful actually happened. But it's really important. It's a pivotal scene in the relationship, in that this might have been an episode where Alan physically hurts Brenda, but what's also important about it is his realization right after that happened of how hurtful and devastating it is for Brenda and also for him. And that actually, I think, reinforces how much he actually loves Brenda, that feeling of remorse and contrition after it. Yeah.
And it follows with that not nearly as gut-wrenching, but gut-wrenching sequence where she goes to seek help from the elders of the church, and they basically say, this, we're not going to help you. Essentially, this is your matter. We're not going to step in a personal family life. Talk to me about that and sort of the impact of that on the series.
Yeah, I think this is also the episode where we really see more dimension and more depth to Brenda, because I feel like in the series so far, she is not given as much. I mean, she is given agency, but that comes to really blossom and come to the forefront in this episode, and that she, took the initiative to try to bring back her husband into the fold. It's a moment of both vulnerability and resilience for her, and that is the kind of complexity that I try to bring, that I hope to bring to female characters in films and TV shows that I work on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people don't necessarily talk about Under the Banner of Heaven is that it does have Brenda's strong narrative as a woman, working within the confines of this particular branch and family that experiences a very different version of Mormonism than sort of the standard version of Mormonism that we hear about. I mean, it's about her and trying to empower women to take agency within this faith, which I think is completely a revelation and an unexpected story, because I didn't know that much about the Mormon faith outside of Book of Mormon, which is a completely different story.
Right.
This episode also brings Sam Worthington's character back into the fold a little bit, where he's sort of in the background for a couple of episodes after the first two. Talk to me about working with him in this episode and sort of leaning into what becomes, a real showcase for him in that finale.
Sam was a genuine pleasure to work with. He has a very, very unique process to get into his scenes, especially for dramatic scenes, which are most of the scenes in my episode. I realized that, action stars, and he's, played quite a few and some very notable action roles. I feel like the directors tend to tell them, like, do this, do that. These are the beats that you need to hit. But I think for his portrayal of LeBron Lafferty, it's very important that the performance feels present and immediate and raw. And Sam's process is, as we're doing takes, that is how he finds the scene and how he finds the right tone emotionally. So the first scene might feel big because he's really exploring and experimenting, and then the second take becomes more focused and more honed in emotionally, and we usually get it perfectly by the third or fourth take. And in here, especially in the scenes in the bathtub, hot tub, and the one
Yeah.
by the mountain, I feel like I'm being spoilery right now, but to be honest, I did not tell him like what notes to hit. This is what you need to feel at this moment. I knew that as the director of episode 6, right before the finale, the actors on the show have a much longer and much more intimate history and knowledge of their characters. And I gave Sam, as I did Andrew, the room and the space to trust their instincts, to follow what they feel, their characters would feel at that moment. And I think that is how I got the performance that I got out of Sam, that he felt completely free and liberated, and present, to just be and not act.
Right. And that character goes through quite a journey in that episode, an unexpected journey, culminating in that hot tub scene. And this will air after the episode, so we're good. This interview, so it's not spoilery. Where he's grasping for so many things. He's trying to find himself. He's completely lost, and
Yes.
to the point where he shares an intimate moment with another man in that hot tub, and that kiss that didn't see that coming at all. But I interpret that to be just an example of him just longing for some connection somewhere, not necessarily a sexual thing, but just some kind of basic connection with another human being that he's lacked from his own family.
Yeah, and we actually shot that hot tub scene pretty quickly because he was just, everyone was right on the same page. We shot it in an hour, when we're expecting to shoot it in like 2.5, 3 hours.
Wow. Another thing that this series does that sets it apart from sort of traditional true crime dramas is that it explores the history of the Mormon faith through several flashback sequences. How did you have a flashback sequence in your episode as well? How does that differ from other material that you've handled and previous flashback sequences within the series?
My episode is quite notable also in that it has the fewest flashback scenes to the history of the founding of Mormonism. I think I just have 2. The one was Freedom Day, I believe, and the second one was the vignette where Brigham Young finds the place where he wants his flock to settle. And yeah, I think the flashback sequences in my episode were few but quite well chosen, and it actually, especially that Brigham Young vignette, I think fits quite nicely to because it cross cuts with Jeb Pyrie holding on to the secret book of the history of Mormonism that leads to the emotional climax that closes the episode.
And I'd love to talk about that emotional climax because Andrew Garfield is so fantastic in that sequence. It's shot in a very tight space. As you mentioned, it was a tight shot on his face, but it's also shot inside of a car. Talk to me about being that superhero whisperer, which I've heard you mention, and getting him, bringing that performance out of. I mean, I know he's a very dedicated actor, very committed, but that sobbing scene with the camera right there in his face, it must have been uncomfortable.
Yeah. My approach to the whole episode, especially to Pyrie scenes leading up to that scene in the car, was because Andrew is so sensitive and he's so emotionally open. You can see the emotions he's feeling very clearly and transparently in his face. Is that there are quite a few potential dramatic pressure points throughout the episode. One is, of course, when he gives his mother a bath, in the bathtub. A few just learning more about what happens to Brenda, that meeting with Brenda's father, and sister. Those scenes could have been really emotional for Pyrie if we went there. But what I told Andrew was that for those scenes where I expect Pyrie to just get emotional or tear up, to restrain it, to hold that impulse. And so that way we're able to build that tension dramatically throughout the whole episode. And this is also his arc throughout the whole series. But I think my revelation is strategic in that this is really the emotional and dramatic climax for Pyrie. So to just repress those emotions, throughout the episode, so that when we reach the car scene, there's so much emotional pressure already built up that when he has that breakdown, and that catharsis, it feels just right. The floodgate of emotions, it should feel like a dam bursting, and it feels right and not overblown or excessive. And that's why it was important for me to just tamp down like the potential dramatic beats for him throughout the episode, so that it explodes powerfully in that car scene.
And Jeb has that very strong relationship with his mother,
Yes.
and is in the sadness of losing her mentally to dementia. And I believe Andrew also lost his mother in real life. So, I assume that he must have been drawing from that personal loss when acting through those scenes. Last question for you. This is the first time that you've directed something for television. How was the experience for you compared to working on independent film, and would you do it again?
To answer your second question first, yes, I loved working on Under the Banner of Heaven, and I would jump at the chance to work on more television shows that I feel like are up my alley. In fact, I'm actually shooting one right now. I just can't talk more about it. Sure. But the difference between working in film and working in television, at least I've done 3 independent feature films, is that, of course, with film, I have a lot more creative control and autonomy over my vision for the film. With television, especially if you're not directing the pilot, you are collaborating really and working to execute and translate the vision of the writer and the showrunner, and the tone and the visual language set by the pilot. But it was nonetheless very creatively and emotionally rewarding for me, because I was working with such a stellar and phenomenal, creative collaborators. Dustin Lance Black, who's the showrunner, and I'm so grateful that Lance took a chance on me. He saw Lingua Franca and loved it and brought me on. And when I got to Calgary, which is where we shot the series, from day one, he was so supportive. It wasn't like working for a boss. It was like making art with a mentor and a friend. So I credit Lance and a Cult of Imagine Entertainment and our crew really for making me feel at home and giving me, creating the environment that was conducive for me to be completely creative on that show.
It sounds like a beautiful experience, and it's a beautiful episode. So congratulations for the work, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much, Clarence. It was lovely speaking with you.
Thank you, Isabel, and happy Pride.
Thanks. You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.